Welcome to Conversations About Change. I'm Susan Schifrin, the founder and director of Arts Philadelphia, and I'm delighted to be launching this new series of conversations about changing the lives of people living with dementia and their care partners for the better through partnerships. That's what this new series we're doing, Conversations About Change, is all about. It's our 10th year at Arts Philadelphia, 10 years of service. And because everything that we do is dependent on partnership and collaboration, it seemed like a good opportunity for us to have some in-depth conversations with some of our most valued partners. And it's my pleasure today to start off with Madelyne Groves. I'm just going to give Madelyne the tiniest of introductions because you'll learn lots about her during our conversation. But Madelyne started partnering with us in 2018, so it's 5 years. And she has been collaborating with us as one of our community liaisons for our Arts in the Neighborhood project in Hunting Park, the Hunting Park neighborhood of North Philadelphia. So welcome, Madelyne, and thank you so much for doing this conversation with me.
Of course.
Okay. Madelyne is always game to try something new, and that's one of the things we love about her. So I'm going to ask a few questions to get us started, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. So my first question is, can you share a little bit with me and with our listeners about your life and your professional experiences related to dementia?
Well, my professional side, as I like to call it, started out in 2010 when I graduated from nursing school. So I had no idea what an incredible journey it was going to become from 2010 to 2023. I say it's been an incredible journey. All the characters, people that I've met along the way that have definitely taught me so much about dementia and the patients that have been diagnosed with it. I went into the field having no clue what it was like to deal with people with dementia. I did the basics, but it wasn't until I actually dealt with dementia patients that I realized how much work goes into dealing with dementia patients, because it's not just the patient, you're also dealing with the family. And that's something that you have to take into consideration at all times, because you're there a few hours, they're there around the clock, so they know what works, what doesn't. And one thing I did learn out of all of that is you have to have patience, a lot of understanding, and come from a place of caring, because when you're doing it just as a paycheck, everything else doesn't really matter because you're just looking at it from the financial point. But when you go into it with love in your heart, because you realize that one thing I always tell people, you have to look beyond the diagnosis, not just, well, that's an Alzheimer's patient, like this is Mary or this is Joe, and everybody has their own identity, and if you really look and you really are observing, they let you know in their own way when something is working, when something's not working, when they're just not happy. And if you can pick up on those subtle cues, sometimes it makes everything so much easier. And when I work with dementia patients, it's like every day is an adventure, because what happened the day before, they don't necessarily remember it the next day. So you're basically starting from scratch every single day. But what's good about it is you already know what works and what doesn't work. So that's been one of the incredible things I've learned.
So Madelyne, you said at the very beginning that you've learned so much from people living with dementia. And I think one of the things that people listening will immediately pick up from you is the love and compassion that just oozes out of you. And I should have said when we first started that one of the reasons we're having this conversation now is that it happens that February 17th is National Caregivers Day. And I think that one of the reasons that I hoped you would join us for our first conversation is we at Arts call caregivers care partners. And Madelyne, you just said that in order to know what works and what doesn't, you have to take your cues from the person for whom you're caring. That's why we call it a care partnership, because without that other person, you're not going to know necessarily what works for them. And so you've made that point up front so beautifully. You yourself are a professional caregiver, care partner, but you're also a personal care partner. Could you talk a little bit about that for us?
Well, I'm gonna try to break it down as far as the professional side. I worked for a little bit for Sarah Care. So I was actually in the dementia unit, and we had two sides. One was for the ones that were just starting and just weren't as bad. They were still able to have control over certain things and they didn't need that much attention, like 24 hours. But the unit I was in was a locked unit for the ones that were more a little critical, a little more advanced. And one thing I did learn is they are very, very smart, very smart. Believe it or not, they really are. And sometimes I used to have patients that used to watch me as I used to put in the security code that we had. And they used to sit there watching me, trying to figure out the code so they could get out of the unit. And, it's funny at the same time, because you have to take things with humor sometimes, just makes everything a whole lot easier. But, one thing people forget, they're human. They feel just like we do. And sometimes one of my trainings, they run off your emotions and how you're feeling. So if you feel agitated or whatever it is, they can sense that. So if it'll end up agitating them a little bit more. So that's why sometimes you have to pick up on the cues when they're starting to get a little overwhelmed with things. Just know your boundaries and not push. So that's one of the things you really, really have to learn. And from the personal perspective, I take care of my mom, and that's a whole nother long story. With my mom, it's been subtle. She hasn't exactly been diagnosed with dementia, but she is suffering the after effects of the chemo and the radiation that she had previously. But I have picked up on a lot of the changes. She can't be left unsupervised for long periods of time. I have to make sure her medication, she's taking it at the same time every single day. I also make sure she goes to all her appointments. I'm also her translator language-wise, so I have to really be on top of everything. And it's, from a personal standpoint, it can be very tiring. It can be very draining because, you have to be one person for, so many people for one person, and they're solely relying on you to get this done. So it's like, if I don't stay on top of these things, it'll affect her health wise, as far as medication and just everything that comes with it. So you have to find that life balance, what works, where you're just not so overwhelmed to the point where now you're just frustrated with their care, and that is not a good mix sometimes.
Absolutely. That's such an important point that you've just made. We talk about, it's a little bit trite, but we talk about the care partner needing to make sure that their cup is full so that they can give of themselves to the person for whom they're caring. Because otherwise, if that cup is either half empty or running on empty, there is no way for you as a human being to keep giving. You have nothing left
Absolutely.
to give.
Absolutely.
So I'm so glad that you brought up that this is part of the role of being a care partner,
Mhm.
is not only being incredibly attuned to your family member or the person you're caring for professionally, but being attuned to yourself and
Right.
recognizing for yourself that you're human. In some respects, you may be superhuman, but you can't be superhuman all the time. So,
Mhm. Absolutely.
I'm hoping that care partners who may be listening to this take that in and, seeing the human face in you.
And it's like I said, it's okay to just have a good cry sometimes. It's okay to say, "Hey, I need help." And I personally have to say that because I'm one of those people that finds it incredibly difficult to ask for help, because for so many years I have always been a care provider, and I've always offered help instead of taking help. So for me, that has been one of the most difficult challenges that I face, is asking for help. And that's one thing that people should not be ashamed to say, well, I need help in this area. I just need 15 minutes to breathe. It's nothing wrong with all the emotions you feel, because from a personal perspective, I deal with a range of emotions every single day. I feel guilt. And when I say guilt, I mean in the sense like when I'm not here on the weekends, I feel like, oh my God, did she eat? Oh my God, and it's like I still feel that sense of guilt because I'm not there. But in reality, she is kind of okay. So it's okay. Sometimes you feel selfish because you want to do things for yourself, and there's other things that you probably want to do, but your time is taken up by taking care of loved ones or whatever it is that you're doing. So it's okay to just feel these emotions, as long as you release them in a healthy, positive manner. Then it's okay to be human.
Absolutely. And that is a whole conversation we could have in itself. What does
Mhm.
it mean to be human as a care partner, right?
Mhm.
Um, let's, one of my favorite topics, let's talk about how and why you connected with Arts Philadelphia.
Oh wow, that's such a broad topic. There's so many wonderful things I honestly can say about art. Um, Me being a creative individual, the thought of art coming into different communities, especially in the North Philadelphia area, where we do have a lot of seniors. And a lot of the things that I love about art is how they bring people together. And it doesn't matter what race or financial status, they offer the one thing that a lot of the people in the community need, which is companionship. People want to they want to feel valued, like they are still useful. And with arts and the programs that they bring, it gives a lot of the seniors and care partners that chance to bond with others, and they look forward to these programs because a lot of them don't have family, or maybe they can't get around like they used to. So these programs, whether it's once a month or however we do them, gives them the opportunity to be around other people that are the same age as them, probably have the same health issues, and when you're from the same community, you share that same bond, because you could say, oh well, remember when this store was here, and they could share that same bond. And with arts, it's incredible because you could be yourself and be creative, and art is not just drawing. Art could be anything. It could be from cooking, which is art in itself, trying to get everything together, and just so many things. So with arts, it has really brought a lot of positivity to our neighborhoods, gives people something to look forward to.
Well, thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about the neighborhood focus of what we do together. So I like to try to explain to people that, for the first 4 or 5 years of Arts Philadelphia, we were focusing on being as person-centered, as individual-centered as we could be.
Mhm.
Um, and that's very important, and that can never go away.
Mhm.
But there's another part to this, which is being neighborhood centered. That's what we call it. And if you can, so let me ask, in your role as someone working with people living with dementia and their families, had you ever encountered this idea of, well, this is a person who lives in this neighborhood, and that means something to them. So maybe part of what it means is because of their culture, because of what they value, they experience dementia a little differently, perhaps, than a person in the next neighborhood. Is that something that is commonly understood or thought about in the field in your experience?
It is, mainly it comes down to familiarity, what they're used to. It's the same thing like with home care, when versus someone that's in a center, whether a few hours or whatever, they feel more comfortable with what they know. Like when they're at home, they feel more comfortable because it's what they know. And for people with dementia, it's more the fear of the unknown, because when you put them in a place or an environment that they're not used to or they're not familiar with, most of them do regress out of fear because they don't know what's going on. Things have been uprooted. So some of them don't take to change very lightly. So when you keep them in an area where they're familiar, it's their neighborhood, it might be the local health center, it could be their local recreation center, but it's something that's familiar to them that they've seen every single day in passing. So when you stick to the neighborhood and what they're familiar, it makes a great difference because they're in their element and they're in their comfort zone. So it makes things a little smoother.
That's a really wonderful way to say it. And that, I mean, that's true for all of us, really, right? We tend, I mean, many of us are adventurous, but when it comes down to it, when we're ill or when we're feeling vulnerable, it's more comfortable to be with the things that we recognize as part of us. So that's another way in which people with dementia are merely human, right? I guess one of my questions is, what are some of the things that, from your experience, you feel need to change in order, for instance, for the people in your neighborhood to feel they're really supported, they're really heard?
Just try to keep them as an individual, see what it is that they like, what they don't like, try to just get to know them. You know, I've had patients that have been nonverbal, and that has been a challenge in itself because they cannot speak and they can't tell me what they like or what's bothering them. But like I mentioned before, with little cues, you kind of pick up on things like that. And I've had nonverbals, and it's challenging. It really is. But if you pay attention long enough, you will eventually figure it out. So that's one thing that I always tell people: look at them as an individual, not just as an illness. You know, like, oh, okay, well, they can't respond because their brain ain't working right. Oh, their brain is working. It's just not working as you and I, you know, who have our five senses. You know, their brain works. It's just working in a different way than ours. So if we can understand that and work with that, we will definitely get very far.
Can you talk a little bit, because we probably have a number of care partners listening to this and watching us who are thinking to themselves, I am so at the end of my rope, and my mom or my dad or my sister or my brother, they don't speak anymore, and I don't have a clue. What do you mean by what are some of the nonverbal cues that you're talking about that you look at and look for as a way of understanding someone who may not use verbalization to tell you who they are? What are some of the just practicalities of that?
Well, with one patient that I did have, which she was nonverbal, sometimes it was hard to figure out what she wanted to eat or when she's had enough to eat. So sometimes when you were feeding her, she would tighten her lip as a way to let you know, like, I don't want no more, or
Mhm.
she would shake her head. So right there, if you're paying attention, she's letting you know she doesn't want anymore. So she'll clench her lips. So you pick up on body language,
Mhm.
and when they're uncomfortable. They'll let you know. It's kind of hard for me to explain it in that sense, but just follow that vibe and that intuition. If you've been around them long enough, you'll be able to pick up. And they kind of have a sense of when they know they've done something that they shouldn't be doing. Because I've had those experiences where bananas went missing. I had no clue what happened. And she knew she had done something because she took all the banana peels and stuck them in the hamper with all the clothes on top. So in a way, that's letting you know that they know they did something that they weren't supposed to, but in their mind, they can't just put it together that it was something they shouldn't have been doing. So that's why I said those are little verbal clues that they let you know, whether it's through their eyes, whether it's the lips, whether it's something. And like I said, if you're there and you observe, you will pick up on it. They'll let you know. They'll shake their head, they'll clench their mouth, they'll let you know. So it's just a matter of just observing.
And what you bring up, I mean, there is an expression in the field, which is managing behaviors. People with dementia are thought of in terms of behavior management. So the example of the bananas going missing. What you're suggesting, it sounds like, is maybe there was a reason that those bananas went missing. Maybe
Mhm.
the flavor, maybe, who knows?
The color, something
The
that caught their
color, right?
attention. Mhm.
Right. And rather than viewing it as a misbehavior that needs to be managed,
Mhm.
what I hear you saying is we need to think differently and think instead of that's a behavior or a wish fulfillment that can
Mhm.
tell us something about what that person was experiencing, as opposed to, okay, now we're going to take away all the bananas, we're going to take away all the fruit because this person can't be trusted. Those are
Right.
two very different ways of approaching the dignity of a person. You're talking about someone who shakes their head.
Mhm.
Now, maybe we don't understand what that head shake is about, but it sounds like your tendency is to think, okay, what are we doing? What could she be saying no to? And how do I follow through on that? As
Mhm.
opposed to, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Just keep shoving the food in.
Exactly.
I think, there are many wonderful, wonderful people who are giving care to people living with dementia. But I think one of the things you're pointing out, Madelyne, is that changes can be made in what seem like really insignificant, small ways.
Mhm.
They're not insignificant. They're not small because they're about the humanity of that other person.
The compassionate side, as I always look at it, and having worked up close with so many dementia patients, it's the way they show love and affection. It's worth so much more than anything in the world. Sometimes I was the one person they saw and the last person that they saw for maybe the next week till I was due to come in. And they knew, they instinctively knew, like, this is the time she's going to be here, and this is and they did things to show their appreciation to me in so many ways that I would, some of them have left a mark on me that I will take forever, because even now I still have relatives of people that I took care of that I'm still in contact with, and they always let me know how grateful they were that I took care of their long and was so understanding to their needs, instead of just getting upset and, oh my God, and just making the situation worse. And those little moments are the ones that make you feel like, okay, this was worth it. You know, I had one that always had a little table set up, and she would always ask me, "What do you like to eat?" So when I used to get there, she had the little table set up with a little lunch, and we used to sit there and watch TV. And then for her, that meant everything because she had someone to talk to, someone that already understood her needs. And it's a beautiful thing, you know, when you have that bond with the family, the patients, you know, it's a beautiful thing.
And
Really.
you're also talking about one of the things that I focus on a lot, which is just because somebody is living with dementia doesn't mean they are not caring for other people. They're caring differently than they might have previously. But the example you just gave is a perfect example. How do you show someone love? You
Mhm.
prepare food for them. You
Mhm.
ask them what they want and you prepare it for them. And so to the extent that she could, she was doing that. She was taking care of you as you were
Mhm.
taking care of her. And that's a really important um, part of the ongoing relationship that I think gets lost in the translation. If somebody was your mother pre-dementia, they're still your mother, right? For better or for worse, they're still your mom.
Right.
Yeah. So you talked about focusing on who this person is.
Mhm.
But now let's talk a little bit about what we were talking about before.
Mhm.
When we're talking about people who value their neighborhood, who value their community,
Mhm.
what do you think we can do as service providers, as professionals making policy to recognize that people are not, they don't exist in a vacuum. They are who they are, but
Mhm.
part of who they are comes from where they choose to live, where they've grown up, the people
Mhm.
they love around them. How can we make that more central to
Mhm.
policy, to how we develop programs for people with dementia, that part of them that is
Mhm.
about community?
I think one of the main things we need to look at is the specific needs, maybe, of that community that we might be bringing our programs into. For example, maybe it could be a need for transportation for them to get there because maybe they don't have the transportation. Um, Maybe it could be a language barrier. Maybe they don't, it's a Spanish community, so maybe a lot of them do not speak English. So always making sure that there is someone there, such as myself, to translate and let them know what's going on, because I've had that experience with my mom. You know, there have been occasions where she wants to participate in something, or there's something she want to watch, but because she doesn't speak English, it's just doesn't work out. So I think addressing a lot of the issues within the community helps a lot because we know what they need, we know what they want. So that helps us figure out a way to maybe bring that service into that community.
Right. And to have, so in your case, your work with us is you've grown up in the Hunting Park community. You are the person on the ground who knows the community inside and out, and who is the person representing our organization within the community. There is a trust in you. There is an unspoken understanding that you get
Mhm.
the stories of the people we are working with in a
One
way.
of the one of the things that I honestly feel that we just in general need to work on is just trying to get rid of the stigma that comes with mental health. And I'm not just saying just Alzheimer's, dementia, just all the way across the board with mental health. If we could kind of get rid of the stigma just a little bit, I think it'll open more doors for people being more willing to talk and join these programs, because they'll look at it like, oh, it's Alzheimer's, it's dementia. Well, I'm not crazy, or everything that comes with it. So by us having these programs and people seeing that the person next to them looks just like them and functions just like they do, it kind of just lets people have their guard down just a little bit, because that's one of the main things, the stigma that comes with it.
Absolutely. And that stigma has a different impact from community to community. And those of us providing services need to understand that. How would you describe the partnership that you've been in with Arts Philadelphia for the last 5 years? Could you give people listening a little bit of a sense of what you do as a community liaison
Mhm.
to help make the changes that you feel we need to make?
I think part of it is really listening. It's one of the main things, because hearing and listening are two very different things. So you can hear what's being said, doesn't necessarily mean you're listening. So I think one of the main things is just listening to every individual, what they're telling you, what they need, and what works for them. And I think if we do that, it opened the door to much, much more than what we've already accomplished, at least in these 5 years. And that's one of the things that I feel like we don't listen enough.
Mhm.
People sometimes talk and our brain sometimes tends to wander. But I think if we let them know that we are listening and we're taking into consideration everything that they're saying, it makes a difference, because sometimes their idea of what our program is completely different once they are there and they see for themselves what the program is. So once they realize we're not trying to change them, we're just trying to change how we are doing things, it really makes a difference.
And that's, again, a really important point. Um, there is a tendency that I'm painting with a broad brush here, but there's a tendency to have a certain set of activities for people with dementia, no
Mhm,
matter their background, no matter what they look like, no matter what they feel like, no matter how they've grown up.
mhm,
And what I hear you saying is one size fits all is not going to work.
mhm,
And if we think that providing programs that require somebody to abandon their own um, priorities for quality of life, if we
mhm.
ask them to abandon what they believe in and what they want, we're not going to be making their lives better. We're going to be
Absolutely.
right. And I think that's a really, really important, that, and being aware that even people who may not seem to understand verbal language, if that
Mhm,
verbal language is their language, their birth language, or their language that they've always felt most comfortable in, there's a much better chance that even the sounds will help them to feel comfortable and at home.
absolutely.
Whereas someone who's a Spanish speaker, if we babble at them in English, then the sounds are unfamiliar,
Mhm.
and that's not going to bridge. That's not
Right.
going to help us.
It'll only make them shut down, because it's like they don't know what's happening. So their best, or their self mechanism will be to just shut down, because they don't know what's going on. So it's like, okay, they'll shut down, and then the communication just breaks down, because now nobody is being heard. So you could be screaming at the top of your lungs, but if you're not being heard, because it's not in their language.
Madelyne, last question. Um, what do you think our senators, our Congress people, what do you think they need to know about what it means to be a care partner?
One thing they need to understand, one thing they need, it requires long hours sometimes. Um, it's a lot of work. It's not just, well, I'm coming here and I'm gonna do a couple things and I'm done. It's a 24-hour job, that involves not just the patient, it's your family. So one thing they need to understand is we are humans, we get sick sometimes, and if we can't take care of ourselves, if we don't have the resources, to push ahead, you know, we're going to break down. We definitely break down, and that's one of the things, working in home care, it's very stressful for the simple fact that you're working on somebody else's time, not your own. And that's one thing that policymakers and lawmakers need to understand. We need to find a balance
Mm.
between what works and what doesn't, because just because you're a caregiver does not mean you got to run 24 hours without that fuel. It's just not going to work.
Right. There is an expression, informal caregiver. That's what we tend to call people who are caring for family.
Mhm,
They're unpaid, and it
mhm,
is 24/7.
mhm,
And one of the things that policymakers have been looking at more recently is, how do we alleviate some of the
mhm,
burnout and some of the life-threatening illness
mhm,
that comes from being a 24/7 unpaid family caregiver,
mhm.
and in many cases also working full-time.
Right. And
Um,
it's hard. It's hard when you're a caregiver, not just when you work with the home care. It's kind of hard because with these type of jobs, you can't just say, "Well, I'm taking off today," because in this field, you have to make sure that the patient foremost is covered and that they're going to be okay. So it's not like I wake up today, I don't feel good, so I'm not going to go to work. It's like a whole process, that you have to go through before you can even get that. Yes, you can take off, and unfortunately, life throws you curveballs. You might wake up the next day and you're not there. You don't feel good, but because of the line of work you're in, it makes it extra hard for you to just take that day off. And then when you do, it's like a domino effect. So if there's someone not there to take care of this person, now what?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Madelyne, anything you want to say? Again, these are conversations about how together we can make change for the better. Anything else that you want people to know from your perspective as a community member, a professional caregiver, a family care partner? Anything you want them to know that we haven't talked about?
I think we've covered a good portion of the things, but the one thing that I will say to a lot of the caregivers that might be listening to this is take it easy on yourself. You know, just understand that, it's okay. It's okay to just say, I'm tired. It's okay to say, I don't want to do this anymore. And it doesn't mean that you don't love your mom or the person you're taking care of. It's okay to take it easy on yourself and just take those breaks whenever you can, and whatever it is that makes you happy, even if it's 15, 20 minutes, step outside and breathe. So it's that's one of the advice that I can give. Just don't be so hard on yourself. Mistakes happen, things will happen along the way. Nothing is perfect, nothing is going to go as planned. You're going to have curveballs. You might have your whole day planned and then something comes and changes the whole course of everything. So you just have to just understand that comes with the territory. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, and then you're going to have days where everything just runs smooth and you have to pinch yourself and be like, oh my God, I made it through the day. So it's these moments that you just have to just breathe and just know it will get better.
And on that wonderful, it will get better, I want to thank you, Madelyne, for joining me for this conversation. I want to thank you for all the work that you do at home, in the community, with arts, aside from arts. And thank you so much for having this conversation with me.